First of all, what do I have to do degree requirements? How many of you are specialists? And how many of you are majors? Okay, so the rules, we don't any longer have a physical hard copy calendar for the university anymore. At my age, that sounded like an astonishing development, but for you probably it doesn't matter because everything is online and you probably feel you're going to be okay with that, which is great. The rules that you have to meet are indeed online. However, it's nice to look at them every once in a while just to make sure you're up to speed on where things are. If you're a specialist, you're basically making the decision that political science is really what you want to do. Can everybody see that? I would turn lights down, but I have no idea how to do that. Is that okay? Yeah, all right. You're taking, FCE is full course equivalent. You're taking 20 of them, 5 a year, over your 4-year degree. So you're taking half of your courses in poli-sci. Poli-sci is your thing. That's what you really want to do. And we love you the most. Although we really love the majors too. but if you love us, we reciprocate in more or less, I guess, the same quantity. All right. You've probably already done 101. You did that last year. If you had an issue with, well, anyway, I assume you did. But then you'll notice, you go to the department website, there are all these other requirements. There are just a bunch of numbers, actually, because it doesn't mention what field these are. This will lead us into the whole issue of fields. You'll see a bunch of other courses you have to take. This one you must take. One of these, other 5 or 6. One of these other, but what is all this? Okay. It has to do with fields and with our desire to make sure that when you do political science, you obtain breadth. Somebody might be interested in studying political science because they love Ukraine, or they love Korea, and they really want to know more about that, or they really are just interested in Canada. Fair enough. That's okay if that's your passion. But when we provide a political science program, we want you to become conversant very widely with the whole discipline. We want you to know things that are much broader. That's why we don't just say, you want to be a specialist, take 10 of our courses and we're happy. We don't say that. We say, well, we want you to have some balance here. We want you to know things across the board. Moreover, there are some fields, not that we consider to be more important than others, but that we consider to be foundational in some ways for what other things are going to happen in political science. That's why when you get to second year, or you may have done this actually in first year because we allow you to do that, we expect you to do 200. It's political theory, and it's classical political theory up to the beginning, from the ancient Greeks up to the beginning of the modern era. Why do we expect a lot of political theory? Because you see more of it below as a required course. It's not because we think political theory is more important than other areas, although I did my doctorate here, and when I started, for the first couple of years I was in political theory, and then I switched into Canadian politics as my field, and that's still my main area for teaching. And my research is on Canada too, but I use concepts mostly from comparative nowadays. And I read a little bit of political theory or stuff about political theory in my spare time at home sometimes. So I certainly value it, and we all value it, but that's not really, it's not as if we see it as more important. It's what we see is political theory has a particularly important role in shaping our understanding of political life. We all want it, many of us are more interested, at least in terms of our main focus, in empirical things, empirical politics. But our assumption is that knowing the normative debates about the study of politics is absolutely crucial for understanding politics, and is going to be important for at least shaping a mature understanding of empirical politics. Knowing Plato and Aristotle as fundamentally different approaches, having fundamentally different approaches to the importance of empirics, for instance, in relation to ideas, knowing the difference between a liberal and a conservative, those kinds of things, knowing the difference between Lockean and Rousseauian conceptions of the state of nature. These are things that are going to be valuable in a variety of often intangible but important ways for how we might understand other things. So that's why we see theory as very important, and why 200 in particular, classical tradition of political theory, is so important, and it's therefore important for specialists. Then you have to take one of 201, 203, 207, 208, 215. Basically, these courses cover the fields of comparative politics, usually of developed countries in this understanding, development politics, politics of development, that is to say, generally speaking, the politics of less developed or poorer countries, and international relations. We don't necessarily require you in your second year to take a course in every one of these areas, as we do with theory, because we do see theory as somehow foundational in that way. But we do want to make sure you hit at least one of these nails. Okay, so that's why you have to take either developing areas, developing politics of developing countries, 201. 203 I'm losing things now, is American. 207 is Europe, 208 is IR, 215 is East Asia. And we are a department located in a Canadian university, and so we want you to take a course in Canadian politics as well. Canadian politics has waxed and waned in terms of how popular it is. Back in the days of the Meech Lake Accord and the Charlottetown Accord, and these great struggles in the study of in Canadian political life, the near separation of Quebec, all this kind of thing. During those periods, Canadian politics is very popular as an undergrad field. Not so much necessarily today, overall, with students, but we do think it's really important if you're going to study politics in Canada, you understand something about the basics of our institutions. So 214 gives you pure Canadian politics, 224 mixes it with comparative. You have to take one or the other. If you're a specialist, we also want to make sure that you acquire the kind of research skills you need to study politics effectively. And that's why 242 is a required course for specialists. And then, usually in third year, you would take another theory course. This one in modern political theory is of that importance to us, of that field. Now, we don't want we also want to make sure you have an opportunity to take enough courses at upper year levels. Upper year courses are more specialized, smaller classrooms. Fourth year classes, of course, you have seminars, capped at 15 students in most cases. And we want to make sure you get these too. So, on top of those required courses, you also take 4 additional minimum full course equivalents. 2 at least of these must be at the 300 level or above. And 1.0 must be at the 400 level, so you have to have 2 half or 1 full fourth year seminars as part of your course. And overall, you have to have at least 1 course in M1 FC in comparative development or IR, so in 2 of those fields. So you'll notice that back with the requirement that starts with 201, you only take 1 of those 3 courses, but you do end up having to take courses in 2 of those 3 fields. Okay, so just some notes here. Breadth is good, that's what we want. We want you, even if your passion is Ukraine, to know something about other parts of Europe, politics of other regions, maybe the international system. What are these areas that I've underlined? This is the point I'm going to come to under heading number 2, because I think it's important to understand that political science is, you probably know this already, intuitively perhaps, but I think it's worth going over a little bit. Political science is divided into areas, why it is, what they are, I'll come back to that. And then why theory in Canadian, I think I've already indicated that. Theory we think is foundational for rigorous, disciplined thinking about politics and can shape your understanding of other things. I, for instance, teach courses on welfare states at the 4th year level, and I found through practical experience that often some people like welfare states, some people don't like welfare states. The readings we deal with don't have to do with that question. They have to do with why is it that some welfare states are bigger than others? Why do the Swedes have this kind of a society and they pay massively high taxes to create a much more equal society, whereas the Americans are like that? Well, I like Sweden. No, I like America. No, that's not the question. The question is why are these like this and why is that like that? In order to get that other normative question, but then I realized that some students were sometimes having trouble separating the two. So I thought, I'll introduce some political theory explicitly in the course. So the first week when I teach that course, which would be last year and next year, it's a 4th year seminar, I have a week on distributive justice. How much do we owe our fellow citizens? Somebody like Milton Friedman, who's a classical liberal, thinks not so much. I should be paying taxes to keep the streets safe, blah, 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 but otherwise, if I do well, hey, it's my money. John Rawls is another political theorist who will say, well, actually, we owe something to each other. he'll go much further. You go to a socialist like Jerry Cohen, and he will say life should be like a camping trip where we share everything when we're camping. That's what society is like. Okay, so there's from a socialist to a libertarian liberal. All right, so I realized that having that theory was important in that course as well. So we do that the first week and then we go from there. That's what you need for a specialist degree. Majors do 2 majors, right? Generally speaking, or always?
You need two majors or 1 major and 2 minors to get your degree.
Thank you. 1 major and 2 minors or 2 majors to get your degree. So if you've taken political science as a major, it's either one of 2 or your main one in that area. And there you need 7 FCEs. Many of the requirements are similar, 101, 200, one of that series of comparative development and IR courses, one of the Canadian courses. A research methods course, it's a half course at the 3rd year level, but we are likely to be moving it to the 2nd year level next year. And that's instead of 242. Don't need quite as much research methods, not as intensive a background if you're going to do a major as you would with a specialist, as you would expect. On top of that, 2.5 full course equivalents. At least one of those at the 300 level or above, and at least 1/2 course at the 400 level. Okay? Follow those rules. Don't get yourself into a situation, and I've encountered it already. I've been undergrad director only for 3 or 4 months, but I've already received a couple of messages from students saying, I missed this course, missed that one. I want to graduate by December, but I can't get the course I need to get this degree by then. Can you please give me this other course as a substitute? And it's a really similar course, and I look at the other course, it's not similar. Sorry, I can't do that. Okay, we have these requirements for reasons, okay? You're going to have to graduate in April, taking the course through the year. But you're making me pay that much more tuition. I'm not making you pay that much more tuition. Okay, just get the rules. They're actually pretty simple. It's possible that sort of problem might more likely occur. Somebody gets into a major or a specialist late, and then issues come up of that kind. But follow the rules, keep up with them, and then things are okay. Minors, you need 4 FCEs, at least 1 FCE at the 300 level or above. I won't go into that any further. Okay, here's what I think is maybe of most import to you. What are the main fields of political science? But first of all, why do they exist in the first place? Political science is a diverse discipline with diverse origins. I've often heard this from students. You know, I took POL 101 or some other similar first-year course last year, yeah, I think I learned a lot. That's great. I love politics, but it's not like my economics 100 course or my sociology 100 or psych 100. You start with economics, it's the field I would know most of those 3, and you start with marginal utility concepts. You start with the idea that human beings are utility maximizers. I want to get as rich as I possibly can. And I want to use my resources to get the most things at the lowest price. Basically, that's the core of economics. Everything else comes out of that. Once you start with marginal utility concepts, you have supply and demand curves, and they intersect at a certain point, and that's the price of bananas this week. Well, basically everything else is a fancy version of that kind of an insight, all right? What's the political science insight that's an equivalent to marginal utility concepts? There isn't one. Okay. Because political science is diverse, it has different disciplinary and professional backgrounds, and it does different kinds of things. Professor Pauly said in the first session something about you get a kind of philosophy degree when you do political science. It's true. Political theory is very much linked to philosophy. Political science is an academic discipline, by the way, only really started in the US, late 19th century. It's about 130, 140 years old. However, Plato and Aristotle go back a lot longer than that, and so does the whole philosophical tradition of thinking about politics. That's the basis for political theory. So philosophy is one of the origins as a discipline, if you will, nowadays, as a kind of human endeavor of political science. But law, obviously, is too. Law goes back long before the 1880s or 1890s. Legal systems have existed around the world, and people have had to be trained to work in them. And lawyers and legal skills that are relevant to working with and in institutions, those are important too for political science. So part of our foundation is in law. You've probably come across Marx and Weber and Durkheim, functionalism, conflict theories, all this kind of stuff in political science courses. Those general concepts come from sociology, or are most closely associated with sociology. So sociology, philosophy, and law are obviously disciplines or human intellectual activities that help lay the foundation for political science. Economics, to some extent, those of us like Professor Pauly and myself who do political economy stuff, pretty clearly there's a lot of economics going on there. And history, because we often, when we're looking at Ukrainian or Belarusian politics, history is an important part of it. You don't just look at the institutions, you look at the history of the country's development. So political science is a bit of a mongrel discipline. It's a discipline that attracts scholars, students who are interested in politics and the exercise of power, how sovereign states work and how power is exercised. But they bring to it a whole set of different tools that have legacies that come from elsewhere, okay? And that's why we have subfields in political science, and that's why those subfields are often so different. And that's why when we construct degree requirements in political science, we want you to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and a little bit of this, because we don't have supply and demand curves and equilibrium points for bananas this week. We have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and we want you to have a little bit of each of them. Okay, that's where it's all coming from. And so this is so I just laid this out as a general framework for the courses available to you that cover these different domains. At the second year level, we have 200 for theory, comparative 207, 203, 207 is Europe, 203 is American. I put it in bracket. Unfortunately, it's not available to you this year. Probably will be taught again next year. Usually is. It's a very popular course. Development studies, poorer countries, 201 in general, 215 East Asia, Canadian politics, as I mentioned, 214, 224, IR, 208, and research methods, 242. We definitely don't expect you to soak up courses, all these second year courses, and therefore be able to do a bit of everything. But we do want you to, in effect, for a specialist, and probably even for many majors, get a taste of, well, I guess it would be 4 of these at least for the specialists. You'd need at least 2 courses in theory, 1 in Canadian, and in the end, 1 in each of the other, the comparative development and IR fields. And research methods is there as an auxiliary tool. Statistical methods aren't the only thing that political scientists do, but they're part of what political scientists do. Don't like it? Okay, take the course and don't use it again. Do like it? You might. I took methods when I was an undergrad and I hated it. And about 6 years ago, when I was already at a frighteningly advanced age, I decided this welfare state stuff I want to study, this comparative political economy, increasingly these people are using regression. I'm either going to die in mid-career because I won't be able to really be engaged with the issues anymore, or I'm going to have to go back and do this stuff over in a sense. So I bought a big fat econometrics textbook. You can get them, they're about $200 each, but you can get them cheap if you buy them from India through some online service. And I had a bunch of, they fall apart a little bit, but they're still the same book. And I taught myself this stuff and I'm using it, okay? And I actually, now, I do other stuff too still, and political science, here we are, mongrel again. We like multi-methods, the really cool way, the way to seem cool for a grad student or a professor, or an undergrad maybe, who wants to be really cool as a political science. I take a multi-method approach to political science. It means generally I use qualitative approaches, historical, storytelling, and I also use some regression, a bit of each where it's appropriate. How come we have so many courses that are in the comparative field? Is our department slanted towards comparative? No, it isn't really. It's more because comparative also means, I'll be talking about this on the next slide, area studies. So many of these courses are in Latin America, Africa, etc. So comparative embraces the study of particular countries other than Canada and regions of the world outside of Canada. Of course, if we were in the American political science department, one difference in this lineup would be that it would be American politics. That would be the single country set out as an important independent field for study, one country. Where in Britain, it would be British politics. So we have Canadian. Any country you study political science in, at least if it's influenced by the North American model, that country's politics, the study of it, will be a separate domain. And then everything else that is a rich country will be in comparative. Everything else that's not so rich, development. You might ask, well, what's rich and what's not? Is China rich or not? Good question. Countries that were poor not so long ago tend to be still included in the development areas, of course, region, field, so China. But then you could reasonably ask, well, what about South Korea? Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's in the rich group. Things can get complicated at the margins. What about Eastern European countries? They're almost always called comparative, not development, because the communist regimes are always considered to be part of the industrial world. And yet in GDP, they may be lower than many countries in East Asia that are considered in development areas. Now it gets complicated at the margins, but you get the general idea. Industrial countries are in the comparative field, and the poorer ones are not. Some caveats, that is quibbles, additional points. Many courses cross boundaries, so to some extent I shoehorn things into categories here. Most of us have multiple interests. I mentioned how I've glided around the discipline myself in my own interest. And in my own courses I teach, I have a fourth year course on the Canadian welfare state and comparative perspective. Well, that's obviously both comparative and Canadian. Other people mix comparative and theory, comparative and IR. Why should we, anyway, why should they be? Comparative and IR, it's kind of an interesting idea. International relations is the study of relations between states. So you think of states as each being little blocks or cups turned upside down. And what you're studying in international relationship is the relations between one cup and another. Whereas comparative politics, you're studying what's inside one cup and you're comparing it systematically with what's inside another cup. Okay, well, shouldn't we be doing both? Studying the relations between one cup and another, and the comparability or otherwise of what's inside one cup and another at the same time. And aren't these things intrinsically related? Well, I think we kind of get the point that they are. These come out of different traditions of research. They were more separate at one time than they are today. And many courses will bridge over that boundary. I've already alluded as well to the fact that comparative industrial and development is rich countries, poor countries. But how can you maintain that boundary when some poor countries have become quite rich and some industrial post-communist countries aren't really all that affluent? Again, there's a blurring of boundaries. That's an important caveat. Comparative and development are particularly closely linked because they're both basically comparative. Politics of the development of the developing world or underdeveloped world is comparing what's inside cups. How does Afghanistan compare with Iraq in terms of the level of institutional development and the ability of state institutions to guide and control ethnic and tribal level activities within their boundaries? That's considered squarely within development areas, development studies as a field. But couldn't you do something similar comparing Canada and the US? You could. And moreover, would the concepts be all that different? People who study development often say, yes, we have special concepts, special tools, and don't want to be like a comparative industrial crowd, don't let them near us. But others not always say that, and it can be more mixed. Both of those have an area group study, an area studies focus. You've got people studying Latin America, studying Africa, studying East Asia. At the same time, when they're doing that, they are bringing concepts and methods to bear that are shared by other people in comparative politics or the politics of developing areas. All courses that you encountered so far, I'm sure, or in the future, will have both a substantive empirical content, but also concepts, methods, theories will be brought to bear on that material. And they're also the case in Canadian and IR. So theory is not just political theory. And actually that's one thing and another aspect of what makes political science this kind of mixed phenomenon. If you study a theory course in economics or in sociology, What you're studying is the theory that underlies the existing empirical study. So if you study sociological theory, what are the sociological theories that underlie the study of the family today, or the study of dysfunctional families or something like that? Study economic theory, what are the theories that preceded existing current debates in economics? That's not what political theory is. Political theory is not the old political scientists as opposed to the new ones that we are doing in other courses. Political theory is a normative, is a study of norms or values with respect to politics, and it is parallel to, not the old stuff of, which you're going to be studying in all those other courses. And that's part of what makes us this kind of heterogeneous and diverse, and I think rich department, field as political science. Also may be a bit confusing sometimes, holding it all together. Public policy. Public policy is not a separate subfield in our department, but we do have courses in public policy both in the Canadian and comparative field, where the focus is primarily what are policy outcomes, how do they get there, how to improve them. In some departments, public policy might be seen as a separate field. At the graduate level, if you're doing a PhD in our department, you can specialize in comparative or development or Canadian or IR or theory as your main field, and you couldn't use policy as a main field, but you could use it as a minor field. So it's kind of a semi-autonomous category there underlying Canadian and comparative. And finally, yes, all these different components that we want you to nibble at least some of are distinctive. However, they also, there's distinctive instruments, I think was what I wanted to have there as opposed to see, but they all still play together. I think you'll find that there are ways, and I'm not even sure I can articulate them, but maybe you can, or maybe you will think about this, that political scientists do things in different fields that somehow hang together. That in the end, the experience you're getting studying the field is a common one. That although we don't have something like the equilibrium position for banana prices, between supply and demand curves and that X in the middle of there as a core from which everything else comes out from. Nevertheless, there's a family resemblance. Like families are not identically the same, but you can kind of tell they're from the same family. Maybe we're more like that. All right, so that's the structure of our programs. That's why the structures are there, because we have this kind of more feudal situation where we have little principalities that are alongside each other, related but distinct. We want you to sample them widely, and the structure of our program and of our course offerings right up to fourth year are there to help you do that. Okay. Are there any questions? Yeah. So that's a good question. I do comparative political economy. Professor Pauly does international political economy. What is the study of political economy? Well, I could go on. You don't want me to talk about that because I'll go on for 2 hours. But let's say it's the relationship between state and economy, as opposed to I'm a Marxist and I study family, so I'm doing political economy, or I believe in rational actor models from economics and I study the family, both of which is possible. But usually in political science, not always, we say it's the state's relationship to the economy, what causes what's the dynamic between wealth creation and distribution on the one hand, and the sovereign entity on the other. Okay, Professor Pauly studies the political economic dynamics of the international level, so it would be a subfield within IR. I study comparisons between rich countries' economies. How is it, I'm teaching a course this term, that the German economy is structured in fundamentally different ways than the American one? What are the implications for growth, productivity, innovation, and inequality? That's definitely under comparative. And you could imagine it, political economy of developing areas, pretty clear where it is. When I first came to this department, there were subfields, kind of mini subfields identified in many other areas, one of which was political economy, and I was asked to be the designated director or something of that field. When we reorganized the department, we decided, reorganized our program a bit, we decided, what's the point of having these other little categories? They only confuse people. But you're right to point to the fact that beyond these building blocks, there are lots of things going on in political science that really cross these lines. And it's okay to be interested in political economy, and that leads you to different ones of these blocks. other questions, comments? I think this is, you know, it's useful stuff to talk about. We don't often do it very much.